The Chief Justice is appointed by the Governor General on the recommendation of the Prime Minister after consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. On June 12, 2019, Brian Morey was appointed Chief Justice, 2 years after the Minnis administration became the government. 9 months after taking office, the new Davis administration is set to select its own Chief Justice, a person the administration touts as demonstrating long-standing commitment to the rule of law, qualifications, experience, and achievements. An announcement from the Cabinet Office this week recommending the appointment of the Honourable Justice Ian Winder as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the Bahamas. This is to take effect in August after the departures of Sir Brian Morey. Just how is a Chief Justice selected? This is what we will explore tonight. Our topic is choosing a Chief Justice. I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. Our discussion begins on the other side of this break. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference,
more the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back to On the Record. Our guest tonight, a former cabinet minister and former president of the Bahamas Bar Association, Ellsworth Johnson, along with attorney Devard Francis. Gentlemen, welcome to On the Record. Ellsworth, welcome back. You're a regular guest for us.
Delighted to be here.
And my good friend, good to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So, gentlemen, the Chief Justice, Brian Morey, is set to retire. He served as Chief Justice for 3 years. What do you think his performance has been like over these past 3 years? I want to talk about the highlights of his time in that role as Chief Justice.
I think it's been phenomenal. The Chief Justice is a man of high moral standing and great integrity. He has the admiration, support, and respect of, and I know that my colleague will support me, of bench and bar. Over the past 3 years, he has led the judiciary in a remarkable way. COVID-19, the introduction, the long talked about introduction of technology into the judiciary. And now, I'm delighted to sit in my office and go to court right from my office or from home. So he has driven that process. And so through COVID-19, he's properly managed the court. The new rules that have been spoken about over and over again, he has driven that process, taken it on personally, and had that driven through. And then the Court Services Act bill that he demanded in the last administration has been laid in the House. And I'm hoping that very shortly, he spoke about it just recently, an act that would give the judiciary greater, well, they have the autonomy, but a greater control over their affairs. And justices of the Supreme Court, Isaacs, who's now Senior Justice on the Court of Appeal, former President of the Court of Appeal, Justice Anita Allen, and many others have spoken about the need for a contemporary device as the Court Services Act. So he's done a phenomenal job, and I think he's to be commended for the role the judiciary play. So he's done very well.
Devard?
I commend him for the digitization of the courts. When he would have gotten his role as Chief Justice, this would have been in an unfortunate dispensation. As my learned friend has mentioned, he spoke about the peril of COVID-19. I believe that there's still much work to be done. There is still an egregious backlog of cases, especially on the criminal calendar. And I believe, given the circumstances, he would have done his best. And so I wish him all the best in his future pursuits and endeavors.
I do want to talk a little bit more about the digitization of the court, or digitizing the court system, and what that has meant to the administration of justice. As you would have said, he found himself sitting at the head of the court at the most difficult time in recent history. We're in a lockdown. We can't go anywhere. So many things have stopped. But the administration of justice must continue. The courts could not just cease indefinitely. What, and you all having worked during that period, what was that like? And what has that meant to the legal system?
Well, I can speak about it. Basically, it was not only the digitization, but as an addendum to the digitization, there had to be a really remake of the court. There had to be plastered windows that were put up. The jury section had to be remodified. There had to be a compendium of variations as it related to persons who were coming to court. And with the digitization, Jerome, I found that it made life so much easier for us, that I could just wake up in the morning. I'm not going to say what I wore below my but
all of us.
But put on a jacket, put on a tie, and the dispensation of justice matriculated, and it flowed naturally. And so I give him hats off for that. And in the short period of time, because there was not a long period that he had to put these things in place. And so I commend him. And like I said, I wish him all the best.
To add to that, training. Training. And one of the hallmarks of a good lawyer in dealing with what they call a jealous mistress
Definitely.
is not only constantly training, but the former Chief Justice and the new Chief Justice that is to come are students of the law, mentors, and so, as well as a disciplinarian. So, as my learned friend has indicated, the whole process, because the level of frustration was extremely high in the country, and to masterfully bring in the whole digitization process, consider the new rules, fight for the Court Services Act, and I'm going to continue to belabor that, and to do it the way he did, it was done in grand style. And so he's done a phenomenal job.
One of the things he did, which I personally have taken to, and I thought was a brilliant idea, and I guess the situation almost demanded it, but the opening of the legal year was done on the outside. And the circumstances dictated it at the time, but I thought it's happened subsequently since the first time, but I thought it was a great idea, and I think it gave the public a better appreciation for what happens at the opening of the legal year.
He's bringing justice to the people. At the end of the day, we are a country of laws, and we're dealing, the interpretation, the application of the law is to allow people to experience what they say is their best life. And so the courts, in its attempt to facilitate the bringing of the administration of justice, providing justice to the people, it's very good to allow persons to see that these individuals are human and see that process and understand it's an approachable process and is one that you should participate in. Because the converse of what the courts bring in terms of interpreting the law and bringing settlement and civility, encouraging civility in the community is anarchy. So it's very good to see a Chief Justice doing that and leading the judiciary in that way.
Generally, what is the relationship between the Chief Justice and the legal fraternity? I know you talked about the bench and the bar, but what is the relationship, or is there a relationship between legal fraternity and the Chief Justice? Is there any contact, communication?
Well, we are all connected, and like we said, we are a big legal fraternity. We see all the time, and I'm sure Leonard Friend could speak to it, where we would have emails and dialogues with him, especially when he's presenting the draft on new rules that he seeks to put in place. But I believe the substratum of the relationship is, purely based, and this is what we liked. It was open with Sir Brian. He made sure that, his email, one of the first Chief Justices ever, to make sure that his email was very open, that you could have that dialogue. Like if we had a problem, if there was something that was festering that we believe was carrying on for too long, and he was very, very expedient in returning your emails to you, and and most times, there are little nuggets like that that makes this legal fraternity so great. Absolutely. And so I salute him for that, and for creating that dialogue, because certain Chief Justices had this aura about them. I heard a good friend describe it as ominous.
Guilty. And I think that's interesting, because as a public, we don't always understand the relationship. You see the Chief Justice, some of us know the role of the Chief Justice. It's usually at the opening of the legal year when the Chief Justice is the most, is probably gets the most prominence, yes. I should say. But it is a job that requires constant work. I mean, it's not you're just sitting there as a figurehead, but it requires a lot of work, eh?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And, and back to your point on the opening of the legal year, the fundament of that opening is to basically tell of what you did on the preceding year and to give your plans for the upcoming year. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that it was extremely pertinent in that opening of the legal year, where it was open to the public, that they heard the plans of the judiciary. How are we going to attack certain issues? How are we going to deal with backlog? How are we going to deal with the issue of bail and the Bail Act, which is so important? And so I thought that was quite important.
Now, we've talked about the things that he was able to do. Mm-hmm. Unlike a lot of his predecessors, he did not have a lot of time, 3 years. What things do you think have not been addressed in his tenure, and you think should have or could have, or things that have been left on the agenda?
Well, for me, sir, if you don't mind. Sure. I believe, and being a criminal practitioner, I believe that there's still an assortment of issues as it relates to this backlog. And I want to give an example. One murder trial, Jerome, could take anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. There is approximately, I think, give or take, 5 to 7 criminal judges. If we have 100 plus murders a year, and one judge is taken aback with a trial for 12 weeks, and let's just say at that time we have all 5 of the judges, then really and truly we only deal with some 8 to 10 murders a year.
Yeah.
If you do the maths.
Wow.
It calls for better case management, but some of the things, I think, the continuation of the total digitization of the services, to provide them as you can have them in Nassau,
yes.
So too in Inagua. The passing of the Court Services Act. I think with COVID-19 and Dorian, we forgot the facilities, and that has always been a big subject or topic for Sir Brian. The working arrangements or conditions under which they have to provide those services in the magistrate's court, and sometimes we don't hear very much about the magistracy. But going back there, you meet the very same situation, the lack of staffing, proper training for staffing. So there are issues that have been there, I think, and like you've asked about the role of bench and bar, one built on respect, mutual respect. And we are officers of that honorable court to support, protect, and defend. So those are some of the issues, but we're not perfect. But as the new Chief Justice come along, it's the duty of the bar, the officers of the court, as well as the community, to ensure that the institution that guarantees peace and civility, because think about it, if you are unsure about the person who sits as the arbiter of your case, that in many community, it goes into turmoil. So these persons who, through great sacrifice to their family, their friends, their social life, because you almost have to live a reclusive life, come ahead and give that type of service, it's for us to support them. And so, yeah.
You mentioned something, we're going to go to the break very quickly after this, but living almost a reclusive life.
Your children, your wife, and your friends. People,
Absolutely.
Sorry, yes.
And it is a great point that Ellsworth would have brought up, because basically when you become a magistrate or a Supreme Court judge, you're not able to go to every event. You're not able to enjoy yourself at the food festival. You're not able to just hang out on Awaki as the normal Joe Blow. And so, and I believe too that I've seen the pay scale for the magistrates, and I believe that that should also be addressed, because I look at some of the cases that they adjudicate over, and you're talking about, let's just say, you're talking about a $2 million bribery case that they are adjudicating over, and magistrates aren't even making some $70,000, $60,000 a year. And I believe that that's preposterous, and I believe that there should be an immediate proliferation within their pay. And also for the Supreme Court justices also, I believe that they should be well indemnified, well compensated. But I know a lot of times, a lot of the attention is on the Supreme Court and those of the Court of Appeal, and the magistrate court tends to be forgotten. But to be very honest with you, they're the nucleus, in my view, of the judiciary, because everything starts with them. In any indictable case, it starts still at the magistrate court. They have to be charged in the magistrate court.
And that's I guess, and it's not just with the judiciary. There's so many other branches of government and so many other people who do work tied to this, to the administration.
Absolutely.
Even the police, who are grossly underpaid.
Absolutely.
But that's a show for another time.
Yes.
Gentlemen, we are going to take our break right here. And when we come back, more on choosing a Chief Justice. You're watching On the Record. Stay with us. So the project really pays itself back.
Correct.
They set up
At the conference,
more the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
You're watching On the Record. Our guest tonight, as we discuss choosing a Chief Justice, attorneys Ellsworth Johnson and Devard Francis. Welcome back to the show. As said earlier, Sir Brian was appointed on June 12, 2019, some 2 years after the Minnis administration was voted in. Ellsworth, in 2018, while you were junior minister in the Minnis administration, some thought you overspoke when you called for the then Prime Minister to do the right thing and appoint a new Chief Justice. Did you receive a lot of backlash for those comments at the time?
Of course I did. A lot of backlash and some good advice. I do recall one of the persons who reached out to me is Mr. Fred Mitchell. He says, Ellsworth, you and the Prime Minister are not on talking terms. I said, of course we are. So he said, but why you're in his cabinet and you're speaking this way? There's a protocol and a way that you do things. We're running a country. And so at that time, I apologized. Right information, wrong forum. The appointment of a Chief Justice is a most important process in the country, third arm of government. He's the leader of the third arm of government that's called upon to be fearless, impartial, objective, and everything that is necessary to ensure the proper administration of justice. And when you don't have the proper administration of justice, the country goes into turmoil because we are a country of laws. And so I am happy, and I must commend the present Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Mr. Brave Davis, and the Leader of the Opposition for doing it in style. And this process is not shrouded in controversy. So the Constitution requires that that individual is to be appointed by the Governor General on the recommendation of the Prime Minister after consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. And so I'm happy that this process, it's not, you know, you're not waiting. At some point we waited and waited.
So,
But,
which
yeah.
takes me back to that period, that long delay when we had no appointed Chief Justice. What effect did that have on the court?
Well, you know, anything without a head is somewhat of a monster. And I believe that you had the Indians just running wild. But at that time, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe that we had an acting Chief Justice in Lady Vera Watkins. And I think that at that time, she was doing a wonderful job in holding the ship together. But I believe that the delay, and I agree with Ellsworth, that it was egregious. And I believe that not only it had an effect on the court, but I believe that it depleted morale between the actual justices itself, who just was twiddling their fingers and was waiting. And I don't believe that they deserved that.
What is the process, as far as you are aware, in choosing the Chief Justice? Is it just who is next in line, or how does it work? How do you begin to even narrow the list of potentials?
Well, first of all, it's enshrined in Article 93, subsection 2, which gives the ratification of the Chief Justice. Article 94(1) of the Constitution then gives the mechanism, as explained by Ellsworth rightly. It is the inherent discretion or recommendation of the Prime Minister. The appointment hearing is done by the Governor General upon consultation. Now, we don't like to mention it, but the elephant in the room is there is a political element to it, of course. And with having an elected leader and an elected new Prime Minister, that inherent discretion lies mainly with it.
As you mentioned, will then the Prime Minister seek to find someone who is going to favor his government or favor his policies?
No. I think that this process, and I agree, there's a political element to it, but in these matters, the Privy Council has advised that as best as it can be, it should be insulated from political influence.
Yes.
The individual that is to be selected understands that he's to be impartial, he's fearless, because he must judge matters between the Goliath, which is the state, led by the Prime Minister, and the Davids. He has that obligation. And so that process is made even much more easier by the character, personality, moral standing, if I could use that word, the dignity and integrity of the individual who is going to be selected to hold that office. And so, yes, you would have, and that's why it requires the Governor General, who's the head of state, represent the Queen, the
Consultation with the opposition.
consultation with the opposition, and you've heard absolutely nothing from the leader of the opposition. I can say that I spoke to him about the process, but the gentleman that's to take office and I'm going to be quiet, is an incredible general, of high moral standing, impeccable integrity.
We're going to come
We'll
to
get
the
it,
next
we'll get it.
segment.
Yes,
Because
okay.
I do want to spend some time talking about the new appointment. But again, to the process, you know, is the Chief Justice something that members of the legal fraternity aspire to? Or are you just good at what you do and find yourself in line for the position?
Well, like I said, and I described it as an inherent discretion. And that discretion lies with the Prime Minister. Now, you asked a very important question. Firstly, we would hope that if the Prime Minister chooses someone, competency would be first and foremost and at the apex and zenith of the list. Secondly, Ellsworth mentioned it, and character is very important. And thirdly, they must have a certain representation, a certain intellectual swag about them that could not only could he talk with scholars, but you want to make him amenable to be able to talk with persons within the nation, that he could break down the law and the legal ramifications there is. And so I believe, and I join with Ellsworth and not getting into it, but I believe that selection that was made was incredible and nothing short of phenomenal in the choice that was made.
In my career and lifetime, there was a time when the Chief Justice was not Bahamian. We had foreign Chief Justices who sat over the court, but that has now changed. And you know, what has that made a difference?
Definitely. Because you find someone having to adjudicate who may not necessarily, and in dealing with persons who are foreign, who would be shipped in per se to be Chief Justices, you find someone who had basically no cultural synchronization, no cultural configuration, and so there may be some parts of the cases that they simply don't understand. You had persons who obviously would have had a problem with our dialect and how we speak, because don't forget now, they're dealing with transcripts and having to read transcripts. And so I believe now in the Bahamianization of the Chief Justice, I believe that it was an awesome feat that was made by our country, and I believe in naming those Bahamian Chief Justices, and Ellsworth could help me. I think it would have been Sir Cyril Fountain, Sir Brayton Hall, Dame Joan Sawyer, Sir Hartman Longley, Sir Michael Barnett, Stephen Isaacs, and then there would have been the acting in Lady Vera Watkins, and now we have Sir Brian Murray, and then now we go to Justice Ian Winder.
And I think it you know, and within an independent Bahamas, we didn't always have a Bahamian Chief Justice. So again, as we look now even towards our 50th anniversary, we can see the progression. I think that's important. And just having the cultural wherewithal is so very important when looking at these. And gentlemen, we're going to talk about the new Chief Justice in just a moment. We've got to take a break. Stay with us. You are watching On the Record. We're going to be back right after this. So the project really pays itself back. Correct. They set up
At the conference,
more the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back. We are discussing choosing a Chief Justice with attorneys Devard Francis and Ellsworth Johnson. Gentlemen, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas has recommended that the Honourable Justice Ian Winder hold the position of Chief Justice. What are the qualities and attributes you think should be sought when selecting a Chief Justice?
Integrity, competence. That individual should have demonstrated the versatility and skill by the complexity of the cases that it would have done before, while in private practice and as a justice. And so appearing before the Magistrates Court, the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, and distinguishing yourself before the Privy Council, character, your private life, incredibly important for what you're doing, because you will now superintend the third arm of government. You're the chief executive officer. And fundamental to the smooth running to any country is to secure the proper running of the administration of justice. And so you need someone that the country respects. One of the value proposition that we sell to the world, when you hear soon-to-be Dr. McCartney, congratulations to you, when they go abroad and they speak, one of the value propositions that they give the world is that we have a stable, strong, independent, and impartial judiciary that is insulated from political influence, so you can have your matter done even against the Goliath. And so all of those qualities should be in that individual when they come to do it. And administrative skills. Cutting edge in terms, when I said administrative skills, adapting the new paradigms, technology, you should not be afraid of it to do that. And understanding that the judiciary is growing. The law, the Constitution is a living entity along with the people that you call to superintend or to interpret the law, and that you will be a part of that. And so, great sacrifice, but that's it in a nutshell, and I know that my learned friend can add very much more.
I see you shaking your head. In your opinion, is Justice Wyner the right man for the job?
An absolutely right man for the job. He has an incredible temperament about him. He has a great knack for the law. He's a student of the law. He was or still may be a professor with the Eugene Puig Law School. He is also on the Turks and Caicos Island Court of Appeal bench. He has written some decisions that showed great testicular fortitude or great ovarian audacity. Yeah. He has also proven to be someone who is his feet are on the ground. Yes. He doesn't have an aura or presence that needs to be shined to say that I'm the Chief Justice. He is someone who is quite affable, quite gregarious, and he is someone who I find to be very, very approachable, but yet respect would still be a mandate with him. And I was extremely vivacious when I found out that he would be appointed the Chief Justice. As an addendum to what Ellsworth would have said, he would have mentioned competency, he would have mentioned integrity, he would have mentioned character, and he ticks off on every one of those in that box.
Mm-hmm. From as far as you're aware, were there others who were being considered? For instance, social media there'd have been some bogus report about Damien Gomez being selected as the next Chief Justice. But again, to the best of your knowledge, is there a narrowing process? Is there a vetting process? Or is it normally, well, we've identified this gentleman or this lady, and that's who we're going with?
A great part under this independent Bahamas is that when the new CJ, Mr. Ian Winder, was chosen, it wasn't in silo. We had an assortment of persons who could have been chosen. It could have been, like you said, there was something, although it was a bogus report, find Damien Gomez to be very competent. You could see Justice Bernard, Senior Justice Bernard Turner is someone who is very competent. I've always, Senior Justice John Isaacs is someone who I've seen to be very competent. And so in my mind that we had a compendium of persons
Or have.
by which, or have, exactly, a compendium of persons who could have been chosen, and unfortunately, there can only be one. And I believe that any one of those would have ticked off in all the boxes that Ellsworth would have spoken about.
What does that say, though, about the state of our legal system when we have, as you would have mentioned, a list of people who could have ascended to that post or been appointed to that post? What does it say about our legal system? The reason I'm asking is because many times I think the legal system, the fraternity, the bench, the bar, all come under intense scrutiny and attack from the public because of one of the things you talked about was the delay in justice, the delay in matters being disposed of and other issues that sometimes are out of the control of the court. But a lot of times it's great criticism for the courts and even for members of the fraternity. But what does it say when we have so many individuals who are qualified for this job?
You spoke about the growth, and you spoke earlier about when we had persons who weren't Bahamians who were Chief Justice. It says in 49 years, we've come a long way, where we have a cadre of persons who can fill this office, right? In terms of commentary on the judiciary accepts that, as the Privy Council said, it's not a cloistered virtue, that it must and expect and encourage objective observations by members of the public as long as it does not interfere with the administration of justice. So that's a part of it. That's a part of the growth process. It's not perfect. So that's why you'd have sometimes a judge would give a decision and you appeal it and the Court of Appeal may overturn it. So that's a part of the process, but it's the way that you do it. But it says a lot about our country. When we are selling to the world that not only do we transfer political power, we're able, and we're looking around countries in this jurisdiction. I was looking, and let's keep Haiti in our prayers. When we could systematically, transparently select the Chief Justice and all and sundry, the opposition, bench, bar, my colleague can sit here and say, this man has done very well. And I want to just say this, and I think Justice Winder will not fault me. I know that his mom and his father, who was just recently passed, a man of humble origins. And this speaks well for the young boy in Inagua or Cat Island or wherever that you have the opportunity when you look at his transition from working with Davis and Co., his practice, working at the law school, mentoring students, his involvement with the Bahamas Bar Association, all of these things you look at, his involvement at the bar, and his ability to mentor young practitioners as they appear before him and assist and even send you decisions, right, is very good. So as my colleague has said, my colleague and cousin has indicated, it's a phenomenal choice. He's supported by myself, my family, and my leader.
Does an appointment like this, though, take away from the notion or the fear or the concern that these appointments are political? When you have, from all sides, agreement, even outside of the political sphere, does it take away that anxiety that because a sitting prime minister must make that decision, that it can be politically motivated? Does it take that concern away?
I believe it does, because when you have consensus and you have a consensus that everyone agrees that this was the right decision.
And y'all don't agree.
And we don't agree. We don't agree
Very
much.
rare that you all agree to anything.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
And
it's a good day.
Exactly. And it sort of reminded me even when at one point when Sir Michael was chosen as Chief Justice, although there may have been a political element, but he at that time was an awesome choice. He adjudicated fairly. He was extremely competent in the way that he adjudicated and was the arbiter of trials itself. And I believe that that same notion and that same ambience is around this appointment as it relates to Justice Winder.
We know that the former administration attempted to bring legislation to Parliament to make the office of the Chief Justice independent. What are your views on this move to make that office fully independent?
I think it's phenomenal. And it has been led by justices of the Supreme Court. They assisted in the drafting. I well remember when I was bar president, Senior Justice John Isaacs speaking to the Court Services Act and the necessity for it, where he gave illustrations that you may need an iPad or a computer, and somebody somewhere determines that that's not what you need. They're going to send you some writing pads. And so there are certain things that you're the professionals, you're the third arm of government, you should be in charge of your budget. You should determine who you will hire to work for you. You should be in charge of your budget, as my learned friend indicated earlier, with the working conditions, and we had in the Supreme Court and the Magistrates Court. You know when the plumbing needs to be fixed. So there are certain things that the judges should training, ongoing professional development training, or in first world countries and third world countries in the region, Jamaica, Barbados, they have a Court Services Act. It's long since overdue. And I think that both administrations are to be faulted, because this is something that's been lamented for the longest time. And I listened to the present Chief Justice speaking to the need for it. It's very necessary.
Diwar, is this something that we will see come to fruition in this administration?
I know it is being discussed. I know that I think that we intend to make it incessant from what the former administration would have started, and it benefits everyone.
Absolutely.
It benefits everyone. It's beneficial to everyone, and so for me, there's no violence served in passing the bill.
You know, again, there are not often times that the two sides agree, and I think often when political parties transition to government, there's this tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That because it was brought by a previous administration or a rival, or political rival or an opponent, then automatically it has no merit.
We must stop, cancel, and review.
Yeah.
Yes.
And all sides are guilty of it. So
Yes.
I'm hoping that in this instance that, cooler heads prevail, and if there is something that is in the works that benefits the country,
Absolutely.
that we look at it in that way. But from where you sit as well, do you think many of the modernization or many of the things to modernize the court system will continue under this new Chief Justice?
Absolutely. He's cutting edge.
Good.
Absolutely.
Yes. And not only that, I believe that he was one of the first justices at that time in which to carry out a full trial by Zoom when we were in the embryonic stages of introducing Zoom. And so I remember at one point that he was greatness, his own background that he wanted. And so as Ellsworth would have stated, he is cutting edge. He is someone who everyone in the bar looks up to, and we wish him all the best, as we know that he would do a wonderful service to this country as Chief Justice.
So we certainly will be looking forward to him coming into office. I'm going to preempt even next week. We hope to talk to the outgoing Chief Justice about some of the things that he has put in place and that he would like to see. So we're going to take our final break in the show. When we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the things the new Chief Justice will be facing once he takes over, and some of the things that we hope that he will be able to address or on his agenda.
Yes.
So stay with us. You're watching On the Record, our final segment, right after this break. So the project really pays itself back. Correct. They set up
At the conference,
more the school.
As a journalist, I always have to focus on the facts, and sometimes that means going to investigate for myself. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. right here on RTV.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. This is our final segment tonight. Now, passing the recommendation stage for the new Chief Justice, what is the first thing that, or some of the first things that you both feel this new Chief Justice should address upon taking office?
Well, I believe the first thing, and I would always stay on the backlog of cases, criminal cases. What we're having now, and a lot of the murders you're seeing right now, are persons on bail. So what we're having now is that persons are on remand. They've been in jail for some 3 to 4 years, and by virtue of law, they have a right to get bail if their case is not heard in a specific period of time. And I believe that we need to address this backlog of cases in a way that it is now becoming a malignant tumor to our streets that is festering into a horrible criminal spree that is going on right now. And if this isn't addressed, it then now starts to touch home at tourism, because then the U.S. Embassy would then send out a notice.
They've started.
Exactly. And I believe that it is so important for us to address that immediately, even if we take the low apples. And when I say the low apples, there are some cases that it is so luminously clear that the defendant may be culpable, although everyone has a presumption of innocence. But I believe that there needs to be such a stringent delegation of the cases with the low-hanging fruit that we need to get and we need to expedite these cases. I mean, and I believe it's a matter of urgency now. I'm reminded, Jerome, of a lady on Robinson Road last year who was just sitting in church for prayer meeting, and some 100 meters across the road, there was a gunfight going on. A stray bullet hit her in the back of her head while in the middle of her worship. And these are the type of things, I think that there was one point, Ellsworth, where there were some kids being hit in homes with
Or even
stray
on the
bullets.
park,
On the
on
park.
Park Lane.
Exactly. And all of these are persons who are, because if I see you, and let's just say, I'm going to Regatta, I see Joe Blow, who I know is the one who killed my brother, and he's on Regatta partying just as much as me at Regatta, then that brings up a feeling of retaliation in me. So this backlog of cases is extremely important for us to address.
The first, for me, I think he has a team, the entire team, and he's the leader of the judiciary, right? He would, for the opening of the Court of Appeal, he would go up to the Court of Appeal, right? And so he has to settle his, well, the team is not in a disarray, but he must make clear his mandate, meet with his team, reassure certain persons, because as you made mention of, there may have been persons who were senior to him. So he has to settle that team down.
There's always a concern.
Yes. And there is confidence in him and deal with that. The backlog is an age-old problem that we face. And I know the former Attorney General spoke, Ms. Alison Gibson, and any Attorney General has spoken to it. Case management, how do we properly manage these matters? And dealing quickly with matters as they are brought before the judiciary, and providing the judiciary, he has to fight so that the government will provide the judiciary with the resources that it needs to do its job.
That's good.
You know, sometimes it's unfortunate, but, and I'm being as tactful as you shouldn't need toiletries and they can't get it. So these type of things, the Court Services Act, allowing them not to wait on Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so to sign a requisition to get a computer or to fix the leak, those things. So he has to get on top of that. And yes, what coming from his background, and there was something that was introduced, because the judiciary, as any number of chief justices and former Court of Appeal presidents would have said, is the last point on the continuum when you have a problem. A proper reintroduction or reinjection of the judiciary as they were doing, meeting with certain elements in the community to say, listen, your problem is really in the family. Your problem is with your sons. I remember one judge says, I don't want to see them in here because when they come here, the choices are very few for me. I'm going to be as fair and as impartial as it is, but if I have to issue a death sentence, I will issue it. If I have to send him to prison, I will send him. But long before you can do that, and where we are as a country in terms of the growth of the country coming into to the 50th anniversary, I think a lot of the criticism that you say is launched against the judiciary should be rest elsewhere. But settle down his team, get with his team, reassure his team that the thrust for the digitization or proper development of introducing the proper tools to the judiciary to do their job will be on his agenda. Yes. Ongoing professional development, training for the judiciary, identifying young persons, young Bahamians, as he was identified, to fill these positions in the future. And yes, as a sword, a samurai sword cuts extremely well to let all and sundry know that if you appear before these courts, especially bar, that we're not gonna, you're not getting all these adjournments. There's gonna be disclosure. Yes. And when you come here for business, and you can confirm one place, tell me where you can go and you can't get an adjournment. The Court of Appeal. So at some point, our colleagues must know that if you come to the Supreme Court, if you take a matter, you take it to do it, you come prepared to do it.
Come prepared to do the work. Gentlemen, we're just about out of time, but very quickly, and I guess the two are, I do want your opinion on this. As we have a new Commissioner of Police now taking office, we have a new Chief Justice coming in, do you think there is an opportunity in the future for a little bit more cohesion or a cohesive relationship between the police and the courts, considering all that we face with these criminal matters that we've spoken about? I mean, and in the media, we see it all the time where you know, cases are lost and all kinds of things happen in the courts. And there's not always seem to be agreement between the police and the courts. Do you think this is an opportunity for a fresh start?
Definitely. I believe that this is an awesome opportunity for a new genesis with the courts and with the police. There's a word that Ellsworth kept on mentioning today, and that word is training. And I believe that it's very important for us, for everyone to come with that mind to not only disseminate information, but to be able to learn. Mm-hmm. And I believe with the police and with the courts, there can be an amicable amalgamation between the two parties. I believe the police, who is responsible for collecting the criminals, and the courts, who is responsible for trying the criminals. I believe that there needs to be, first of all, training on both sides. There needs to be recertification. And there's a word that we don't like to talk about, exposure. I believe that there needs to be an exposure of different jurisdictions on how is it that Singapore and Cuba could keep such low crime rates? Why is it that their murder rates isn't as exponential as the Bahamas? And so it's my hope, and to that, Jerome, I want to give congratulations to Clayton Fernanda, the new commissioner, and Mr. Lehman Delaveau, the new deputy commissioner, and all the best in their pursuits. But I believe that there needs to be an answer that is coming forth with, because my children, I want them to live in the Bahamas.
Gentlemen, very, very quickly, you've got 30 seconds, sir, to wrap up.
The law doesn't allow for any dissension in the relationship between the judiciary and the police force.
That's right.
To the extent that it does not allow, you have your role. Chief Justice Barnett said he doesn't investigate. He doesn't prosecute, and neither does he defend. You come before him, and he would do his job. Ongoing professional training. And if you're not the professional enough to understand that both entities are significantly important to the continued growth of this country, then you should not be there. I join with you in congratulating a Cat Island man,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Fernando,
Can Island been doing good?
and Mr. Delavo.
We've been doing good across the board.
And Mr. Delavo, a very good friend of mine, Mr. Delavo, in their recent promotions.
We are out of time, but thank you again for coming. But I do want to end with this, and it's so important. I think, even though we're speaking about the judiciary, and we started to mention the police force, I think we're at a critical time in our country. And I'll just share something with you. Recently, on assignment in Rwanda, a colleague of mine looked at me and said, "I feel safer here than I do at home."
Wow.
And I agreed with him.
Wow.
And so I think we are at a critical point in our country. We have to do something to arrest this crime problem.
Absolutely.
It is taking us over day by day. So it is my hope and prayer that as we have a new commissioner and soon to be a new Chief Justice, that we will turn the corner and begin to see some changes. We need it. We cannot continue down this road, as you both have said. Gentlemen, thank you so very much
Happy
for coming on.
independence.
Happy independence,
Happy
yes,
independence.
very much so.
Yeah.
I've certainly enjoyed our discussion tonight. Unfortunately, we are at the end of that discussion. We appreciate you taking time and joining us. We hope that you can join us another time. Our guests tonight, of course, attorneys Ellsworth Johnson and Devard Francis. Our topic, choosing a new Chief Justice. Be sure and join us next week. We're scheduled to have the outgoing Chief Justice joining us to talk about his tenure on the bench. Until then, I'm your host, Jerome Sawyer. See you next week, same time, same place, right here on The Record. All right. But it's true.